All right, guys. This next guest is a man of many talents. I'm talking producer, rapper, DJ, studio engineer, and label owner. He's worked with Royce the 5'9", Sadat X, Tony Touch, Master Ace, Psycho Les, El the Sensei, MOP, The Beat Miners, Smith & Wesson, Black Moon, just to name a few. Okay, that's just to name a few. I'm talking about the one and only Jake Palumbo.
Jake Palumbo, man, what up? Glad to be here, yo. Thank you for having me.
How you doing today, bro?
I'm good, bro. I just left the studio, just wrapped it up for the weekend, and I'm here rocking with Panda Chop.
I appreciate you, man. So I just want to thank you for your time today. So let's start at the beginning. Where are you originally from?
I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee. I lived around, for the first half of my life, I lived around East Tennessee. I was born in Knoxville. I lived in Morristown, Tennessee for a little while. I lived in Johnson City, Tennessee for a little while. And before spending the second half of my life up to this point in Brooklyn, New York. But, we'll obviously get to that later. But I was born in East Tennessee. Not exactly, the first place you would think of as like a hip hop hotbed or anything like that. But, that's the power of hip hop.
Right.
It was able to find me down there. But
did you grow up with any siblings?
That's why, what's that?
I said, did you grow up with any siblings?
I'm the oldest of three, yeah.
Oh, okay. And what did your parents do for work?
My father was a mechanical engineer for Philips Electronics. Philips Electronics, they made TVs and, all kinds of consumer electronics for many years. They had a big station in Knoxville, Tennessee, and my pops worked for them. He, mainly just designed and executed models of components, things, little different parts that went in televisions and things like that. He did actually work on one of the first ever TV screens that was in an airplane. They commissioned Philips in Knoxville to do that. So now one of the reasons, a quick side note, one of the reasons that I got so bitterly pushed towards a life of entrepreneurialism is my father's smarts and his technical ability and, how good he was with numbers and micrometers and things like that. That helped Philips make millions of dollars. And my father out of that got a coffee mug, it was like a coffee mug with the Philips logo and, the little picture of the TV on the airline. So, even as a child, I was like, yo, my pops,
was this given thank you for working for X amount of years or
Well, no, just in terms of he really helped them with a big project that, it put television screens in airplanes for the first time. And aside from his regular salary that he got going to work, all he got out of that was a coffee mug. And so, I remember as a kid being really, angered and driven by that, and I guess that kind of later on pushed me towards a life of wanting to work for myself and whatnot. But yeah, my father worked for Philips Electronics. My mother was a homemaker. She took care of home and, looked after three lunatic children. And, they kept a lot of music in the house. My parents had a very big vinyl collection that was real eclectic. My father was into a lot of prog rock, Rush and Yes and King Crimson and Pink Floyd and that kind of stuff. My mother was all over the place. She would listen to Black Sabbath one day. She would listen to Cat Stevens another day. But as a small child, as a baby, I was fascinated with the record collection. And when I was a kid, I used to actually I would get a record off the shelf and start chewing on the vinyl. I've joked that that led to me having the vinyl addiction that I later developed in life as some kind of chemical reaction or whatnot. But there was always a lot of music in my house. So from the earliest of age, I I was entrenched in their record collection, and, anytime there was music on TV, I didn't care what genre it was or whatever, I'd be parked in front of the TV just trying to study the musicians and just, see what they were doing and what makes it tick. So.
Right, because you described yourself like as almost having like obsessive personality, right? Since a kid that
Very
drove
much
you
so.
to basically study like everything about anything you were interested in.
Yes, like that's the cornerstone of my personality, is that like if I get into something, I cannot rest until I know every micro working detail of how it operates and things like that. So, whether it's music, whether it's pro wrestling, pornography, whatever it is, like I always like to know the inner workings of things I'm passionate about. But yeah, but to your point, I have an obsessive personality, and, growing up in Tennessee, like I was born in the 80s, I was a kid in the 90s, before the internet and stuff like that, and living where I lived, like there was not a lot to do. So if you didn't have like a passion or something to keep yourself occupied with, you're going to find ways to get into trouble very quickly. So my parents were always real cool about, they never gave me a hard time about like the noise I was making with my music, because they knew where I was at. Like I was in the bedroom, I started playing instruments when I was a kid, and, when I was in school, I had little garage bands with different people and things like that. And they never gave me a hard time about like, the noise I was making with my music. Like they encouraged it, because they're like, the things this kid could be out doing, because I was a bit of a maniac terror anyway. So instead of, my mother was encouraged to put me on like Ritalin and, drugs to, quell my hyperactivity. And instead of doing that,
wait. So
mom,
were you diagnosed with like ADHD at a young age?
in Tennessee in the 80s, they didn't have those kind of diagnoses yet. Like,
Right.
I wasn't even delivered by an OBGYN. Like of the three kids, like my brother was the only one that was delivered by a proper OBGYN, because Tennessee didn't get one until like 88. So I'm saying that to say that like there was no awareness of ADHD, hyperactivity, anxiety, like all the things that like we aware of today. Like there really was none of that. Like Tennessee, I always say, was kind of like 10 years behind the rest of the world at that point. When the internet came out, like that changed things, because everybody's getting the same feed of information at the same time. But nah, like I was never formally diagnosed. I just was I was a maniac. Like I would wake up in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. and just tap my mom on the shoulder and ask her how hydrogen works or something like that. Like my brain was just constantly always going. So instead of putting me on medication or putting me in some kind of disciplinary program or something like that, she fed me creativity. It was like, make your music, write your lyrics, I was always encouraged to do something creative and given total freedom in that department. So.
That's amazing, man, because, a lot of people confuse that kind of behavior with you being like, with the child being, I don't know, rambunctious, or like, you know what I mean? Like that They need to be disciplined or something along those lines. But she fed into your creativity, allowed you a productive way to channel that type of thing.
1,000%. Like I wouldn't be talking to you today, like if my parents hadn't given me that environment. Like I firmly believe I would have probably, fallen into the traps of living in Tennessee. But no disrespect, I love my home state very dearly, but we have a love-hate relationship sometimes. But anyway, recognizing that like she took it as a challenge, basically, that, I need to give this kid something to challenge his brain and occupy it instead of trying to suppress it. So very grateful for that part. Like we didn't have a lot in the way of money, and, I didn't own a pair of Nikes until I was 21, but like, I got to do a lot of cool things as a kid because, my parents gave me such an open space to be myself,